Jane had never imagined that an ordinary dinner could completely change her life. A creeping sense of suspicion began to seep into every cell of her body as she stood up to leave the table. That night, the restaurant's dim golden lights fell across her face, highlighting the wrinkles that had only just begun to appear. But something darker than those lines, heavier than the exhaustion of recent days, was closing in around her. Betrayal. The dinner had been arranged to celebrate her 63rd birthday and her so-called retirement. Luke, her son, had proposed it, even though she never truly felt the need to step down. He said it was a chance for the family to come together, yet there was something different in his eyes. Claire, Luke's wife, sat beside him, appearing gentle but sharp, her smile slightly forced, as if everything had already been carefully arranged. It all looked like a pleasant evening, but Jane sensed the shift in the air the moment she walked into the restaurant. Something was hidden beneath the well wishes. A tense silence lingered over the meal. No one spoke much, only hurried compliments and polite phrases she had heard thousands of times throughout her career. She was an architectural heritage conservation expert, someone who had devoted her life to saving historical structures, and now she felt as if she was standing on the edge of invisibility. They looked at her with pity, offering advice that she should rest, that age had begun to affect her work. Those words felt like nothing more than an excuse to take away her right to decide for herself. As Jane sat down, her vision began to blur. She tried not to show her concern, but she could not escape the fatigue that was overtaking her calm. At first, she thought it was simply ordinary tiredness, the result of age and long nights spent working at her drafting table. But tonight, the sensation was stronger than ever. She looked at the dishes in front of her, trying to focus, yet there was something intangible hanging in the air. Luke, with an almost overly caring tone, reached out and touched her hand. "Mom, you look so tired," he said gently, but with calculation beneath his voice. "You should rest now. You've done enough." His words sounded like a soft dismissal, as if her value had already been used up. Claire sat beside him, offering a faint smile. "You've built an admirable legacy, but perhaps it's time to let things run on their own," she said without hesitation, as though the decision had long been made. A sharp pain struck Jane's chest. She had spent her entire life fighting to preserve historic buildings, battling real estate companies, councils, defending values that society seemed to forget. And now they stood before her, judging her as an obstacle, something that needed to be removed in order to move forward. They spoke of her best interests, of protecting her from excessive stress. Yet inside her, a storm was raging. She was not only facing physical decline, but also being pushed aside by her own children, the very people she had devoted her life to raising and protecting. When the dinner ended, Jane stood up, feeling as though her legs might give way. She leaned against the chair for a moment, trying to steady herself, trying to hide the weakness she refused to let anyone see. Luke rose, intending to walk her out, but she shook her head. "I need some space," she said, her voice dry. "I can go on my own." As she stepped outside, the cool night air did nothing to ease the suffocating weight in her chest. She crossed the sidewalk, trying to keep her mind steady, but moments later she realized her phone was gone. She sighed and turned back toward the restaurant, blaming herself for her carelessness. When she stepped inside, the atmosphere had turned strangely quiet. The restaurant was nearly closed, only a few staff members moving about in silence. But what unsettled her most was the look in the eyes of the young waitress, Lily, when she saw Jane. Lily's eyes widened in clear alarm. She hurried toward Jane and quickly locked the door behind her. A strange feeling washed over Jane. Before she could ask anything, Lily spoke, her voice trembling. "You have to trust me. I wouldn't do this if it wasn't serious." Leading her into a small room behind the bar, Lily quickly pulled up a surveillance screen. Jane's heart seemed to stop as she watched herself leaving the table, while Luke and Claire remained seated, their expressions cold, like predators waiting for the right moment. But the truth did not end there. A liquid from Luke's bottle was being poured into her glass, drop by drop, like a plan that had been prepared long in advance. "She thinks it's just age," Luke's voice echoed clearly through the footage, mocking his mother's weakness. At that moment, everything became clear. It was not age, not exhaustion. It was all cold calculation. Their mother was not a burden. She was an obstacle that needed to be erased. Anger surged within Jane, but she did not let it control her. She needed a plan, a decisive strike. The life of Jane Markham, a woman once respected by society, was now facing more than physical decline. She was fighting against the very people she loved. Yet, like the structures she had spent her life protecting, Jane knew that everything could be restored if she could find the crack within the betrayal. Jane stood silently in the parking lot, her footsteps echoing in the stillness of the night. Her vision was blurred, the dizziness and disorientation still clinging to her, but that was not what unsettled her. It was something else entirely, a truth not yet fully revealed, yet already enough to tear apart everything she had believed in for so long. Her mind had not fully processed what had happened inside the restaurant, but something deep in her chest, in every breath she took, told her that everything had changed. Her life had split into two, before and after. She turned back toward the door, where Lily still stood, her worried gaze fixed on Jane. Lily had just locked the door, the faint glow of neon light falling across her face and highlighting the creases on her forehead. Suddenly, Jane felt an unexpected lightness in her chest. In that moment, Lily was no longer just a waitress. She was a savior, even if she did not realize she had changed Jane's fate forever, someone brave enough to face the truth without fear. "This can't be real," Jane whispered. "I must be dreaming." Her breathing was uneven, every word weighed down by loss and pain. Her hands clenched tightly as she tried to steady herself. Even though every sense in her body warned her that she was facing a cruel scheme, Jane still could not believe that her own son, the one she had devoted her life to raising, could do such a thing. Lily looked at her, her eyes filled with regret and fear. "I couldn't let you leave without knowing the truth. You have to understand, what they're doing to you isn't love. It's exploitation," Lily said, her voice trembling. She quickly turned on the computer and pulled up the footage of Luke and Claire sitting at the table, speaking calmly, while behind those smiles was a calculated plan to weaken Jane. Every drop Luke poured into Jane's glass felt like a sharp blade piercing her heart. The footage struck Jane like a shock, a blow that cut straight through reason. The images, though slightly blurred and fragmented, were clearer than anything else. Luke sat there, his hand pulling out a small bottle, transparent and pure. She could see every movement, from unscrewing the cap to letting each drop fall into his mother's glass, all done with practiced precision, as if he had done it countless times. Then Claire's laughter rang out, soft yet laced with cruelty. "She won't notice. She'll probably just think it's her age when her vision starts failing," Claire said, her tone filled with pride. A cold chill ran down Jane's spine, yet she did not panic. The truth, no matter how painful, could not break the core of who she was. Instead, it awakened something she had long forgotten, a resilience and strength that could not be taken away under any circumstance. "They want me gone. They want me to submit," she thought. But in this dark night, as betrayal stood fully exposed, a new resolve took shape within her. She would not be defeated. When Lily shut the computer, the room dimmed slightly, leaving only faint pools of light from the ceiling lamps. Lily looked at Jane, her eyes filled with concern and respect. "You can't let them keep doing this to you. They've been planning it for a long time," Lily said, her voice carrying a quiet urgency. But Jane only shook her head gently. She did not need anyone to tell her what to do. She already knew. "So what do I do?" Jane asked, her voice calm in a way that was almost startling. Her mind was no longer clouded. She had seen the crack. Now it was time to restore everything. Lily was silent for a moment before speaking, her tone soft but firm. "You need to stand up, Jane. Find yourself again, and don't let anyone make you feel like you're no longer capable. I can help you, but you are the only one who can save yourself." Jane took a deep breath and stood up, her eyes more determined than ever. She knew nothing could return to the way it was. Her son, the one she had sacrificed everything to raise, was now trying to push her into the shadows of invisibility. But if there was one thing that could never be taken from her, it was her intellect, her knowledge, and the strength she had built over a lifetime. Jane looked into the mirror and told herself, "I am not the weak one. They are." That night, when Jane walked out of the restaurant, she was no longer the woman who had once been shaken by her family's words. She was steady, resilient, and ready to face whatever came next. She knew betrayal would not easily destroy everything she had built. And tonight, she would begin rewriting her own story in a way no one could ever predict. Jane could not sleep. Even though her body was exhausted and her eyes were heavy, her mind refused to stop spinning. She sat in the living room, in the house she had lived in for so many years, yet now the space felt different. Every object seemed unfamiliar, as if a layer of dust had settled over everything. She glanced at the wall clock. It was 2 a.m. The outside world was deep in sleep, but she could not push away the truth that had just been revealed. She knew now, she knew everything, but that knowledge did not bring her any peace. The night before, when the images on Lily's computer screen appeared before her eyes, it felt as though everything in her life had collapsed. Jane could not stop staring at that scene, a scene she had never imagined she would witness. Luke, her son, the one she had raised and cared for, was the first to betray her. The silence in the room was filled only with the pounding of her heart, each beat rapid like a warning. She had seen Luke and Claire, his wife, speaking calmly, while Luke secretly slipped something into her glass. She could no longer tell herself it was a misunderstanding. It was a cruel truth. But what shocked Jane the most was their attitude. There was no worry, no remorse, only cold eyes and faint smiles, as if everything was unfolding exactly as they had planned. They want me to submit, Jane thought. They want me to believe I am weak, but I will not let them win. Those words settled inside her like a vow. She would not let their betrayal destroy her. She rose from the chair, her cold hands gripping the armrest tightly. She could not allow herself to become a victim. The living room blurred around her, leaving only the burning intensity within her body. Jane began to tidy up, not because anything needed to be done, but because she needed to keep herself occupied, to prevent her mind from sinking too deeply into thought. She found her handbag on the table, pulled out her phone, and stared at the screen. Seeing Luke's name, a surge of anger rose within her. "We will not let this continue," Jane whispered to herself. "They think I will fall, but I will stand." She scrolled through her contacts, her vision no longer blurred. She found Daniel's number, her former partner in heritage conservation. He was the only person she could trust at this moment, the only one who truly understood the value of the work she had devoted her life to. Jane dialed and pressed call. The phone rang for a moment before he answered. "Jane?" Daniel's steady voice came through, as if he already sensed the urgency in her call. "What's going on?" "Daniel, I need help," Jane replied, her voice slightly unsteady with tension. "I need you to come here now." She said nothing more, ended the call, and stepped outside. The night sky was heavy, dark clouds gathering, creating a suffocating atmosphere. Jane felt as if she stood in the middle of a transformation, between a life that was no longer hers. Her footsteps echoed on the pavement, yet inside she felt an overwhelming loneliness. The images of Luke and Claire from the footage kept replaying in her mind, impossible to erase. An hour later, Daniel arrived, just as he had always been. You calm and clear-headed in a way only he could be. She opened the door and led him into the living room, where everything looked the same, yet everything had changed. The feeling within Jane, the feeling of betrayal, could not be hidden. "Jane, what's going on?" Daniel looked at her, immediately noticing the tension on her face. "You're not yourself." Jane remained silent for a moment, took a deep breath, and then told him everything. Her words felt like they were breaking through a shell she had built over many years, but she could not remain silent any longer. Daniel listened, his eyes filled with concern and understanding. "You can't let them do this. Don't let them think you're weak," Daniel said, his voice firm and decisive. "You still have power, Jane, the power of truth, of intellect, and of experience that they cannot erase." Jane looked into his eyes and felt the warmth in his words. She knew he was not speaking just to comfort her. He understood. He understood that she was not someone who could be easily defeated. "What do you think I can do?" Jane asked, her voice still tense, but now carrying a trace of hope. "We take back control," Daniel answered immediately. "You still have a powerful card they don't even know about. That card isn't physical strength, it's knowledge, resilience, and preparation. You've built an entire legacy of heritage conservation, and that cannot be erased by betrayal from the people closest to you." Jane looked at him, her eyes beginning to shine. She was starting to understand that she was not only fighting to protect herself, but to defend everything she had built throughout her life. This was not just a personal battle. It was a fight for preservation, for justice. And tonight, Jane Markham made a decision. She would not only face betrayal, she would rise, confront it, and reclaim everything that rightfully belonged to her. Jane stood in the living room, the single ceiling light casting a quiet glow and stretching long shadows across the walls. She looked down at the phone in her hand, her fingers trembling slightly, not from weakness, but from confusion, from doubt about the very people she had spent her entire life protecting. Luke, her son, had now become a betrayer without a trace of remorse. She had never imagined she would find herself in such a situation, betrayed by the one she loved most. But nothing could be changed anymore. She had seen everything clearly. The pain in her chest had not faded. Jane could not erase the image of Luke and Claire, his wife, sitting at the table with cold expressions, exchanging calculating glances. She still remembered the moment Luke skillfully pulled a small vial from his pocket and poured it into her glass with practiced ease. Not a hint of hesitation, not a second of concern. They no longer saw her as a mother, no longer saw her as someone of value. She was merely a tool, an obstacle they wanted to remove. Yet instead of collapsing, Jane felt a new strength rising within her. The pain had awakened something she had long forgotten, a part of her instinct to fight that she had poured into her work and the preservation of historic structures. Although the betrayal struck her like a powerful blow, Jane knew she could not allow herself to become a victim. She could not sit still and wait for the end. She stood up and walked toward her desk, where old drawings were stacked in layers. Her hands gently brushed over them, the rough texture of paper and ink offering a strange sense of comfort amid the chaos inside her. These were the things she had built since her youth, heritage conservation projects, critical decisions that had reshaped this city. And now, all of it stood on the brink of being erased, simply because of her son's betrayal. No, she could not allow that to happen. She began to plan. Every step was carefully considered. Yes, they thought she was weak. They believed age would bring her down, that they could easily take what belonged to her. But they were wrong. Jane Markham never gave up easily. Everything she had built, every value she had protected, she would not let them be destroyed by this betrayal. She would fight to keep it all. She gathered the important documents she had preserved over the years, papers related to her conservation company, permits that had been signed to protect historic sites, legal commitments she had worked tirelessly to secure. She could not allow anyone to destroy them so easily. The signs of betrayal were now unmistakable, and Jane knew she had to act. She needed to prepare for a real confrontation. First, she decided to contact the only person she could trust at this moment, Daniel. He had been her longtime partner in conservation work and the only one who truly understood the value of what she had devoted her life to. Daniel would help her determine exactly what needed to be done next. Jane knew that Luke and Claire's betrayal was not just a personal act. It was part of something larger, a scheme to seize control of her conservation company and reshape the entire field. Daniel came as soon as she called, asking no questions, only what she needed. Jane could see the understanding in his eyes. He had seen her face far greater enemies before, large real estate projects she had fought against and stopped. But this time, her opponents were not outsiders driven by greed, but her own son and his wife. "They don't just want me to lose power," Jane said to Daniel, her voice low and resolute. "They want me to have nothing. They want me to submit so they can do whatever they want." Daniel was silent for a moment before speaking. "Then what do we do to take back control?" Jane looked at him, her gaze unwavering. "I won't let them do this easily. I need evidence, I need a plan, and I need to protect everything I've built." Daniel nodded. "We'll do that. You still have power, and people like them can't win if we play this right." Jane felt a sense of reassurance. A plan was forming in her mind. She would not allow everything she had devoted her life to be erased because of the selfishness of those she had loved. She stood up, holding the important documents in her hands, then turned to Daniel. "Thank you, Daniel. We won't give up. Never forget, this legacy is not just mine. It belongs to everyone who has dedicated themselves to it." With renewed determination, Jane felt as though she stood at a critical crossroads in her life. Everything was no longer just about protecting her company. It was about protecting everything she had fought for over the years. And she would not allow anyone to take away what she rightfully deserved. Jane stood in her study, the light from the desk lamp falling across the dense stack of drawings on the table, making the space feel even quieter, heavy with solitude. The lines she had drawn, every detail of the preservation projects, were once her pride, yet now they felt like sharp reminders of everything under threat. Her hands trembled slightly as they moved across each page of documents, every line of text seeming to gnaw at the last of her patience. Everything had been torn apart. The people she had loved most, the ones who had stood beside her for years, had become betrayers. They had calculated everything, and the cost of that betrayal was the collapse of an entire legacy she had spent her life protecting. But no, she would not let them win. When the previous night ended, after the images of Luke and Claire deceiving her had been made undeniably clear, Jane still could not stop thinking about everything that had happened. Each image was like a blade cutting into her, slicing through the layers of protection she had built over time. Yet the more she looked at the truth, the more she understood the cruelty of their plan, the stronger her resolve became. She was not someone who could be easily broken. She was the one who had protected historical legacies, structures of invisible value, and now her own children wanted to erase them for their own gain. But every betrayal has its price. Right after calling Daniel and telling him everything, Jane had already begun searching for a way to fight back. She could not remain still, could not simply wait for this betrayal to spread further. She knew clearly that what Luke and Claire had done was not just a personal act. It was part of a larger scheme to seize her company and dismantle the legacies she had fought to protect. The structures she had defended for so many years were now at risk of destruction because of the greed of those without conscience. The next day, when Daniel arrived, Jane was ready. She no longer wanted only to protect her legacy. She wanted to reclaim the power that had been taken from her. She had stopped waiting and had begun to act. Her eyes were filled with determination. No trace of weakness remained. Every step she took, every word she spoke, was carefully calculated. She could not allow her son, the one she had spent years raising and educating, to become the person who destroyed everything she had built. "We cannot let them get away with this so easily," Jane said to Daniel, her voice firm and resolute. "I have worked in this field for so many years, and I will not let people like them wipe out everything I have built." Daniel nodded, his gaze steady, as if he could see within her an unbreakable strength. "We will find a way to make them face the truth. But you need to be prepared. This will not be easy." "That's right," Jane replied, her hand tightening around a sheet of documents. "They think I am weak because of my age, but they are wrong. What they don't understand is that I never give up. These structures, this legacy, they do not belong to me alone. They belong to this entire generation, and I will protect them at any cost." She turned back to her desk, flipping through the old drawings, the signed contracts protecting the buildings, and the important documents tied to the projects she had completed. Every document, every signature stood as proof of her persistence and relentless effort. No one could destroy them so easily, and she would not allow Luke and Claire to do so. "This is what I have," Jane continued, laying out her plan with Daniel. "We will use all of this legal evidence to protect the company. I have already prepared a heritage protection fund, where all historical structures will be safeguarded permanently, even if I am no longer here to defend them myself." Daniel listened, admiration and pride evident in his eyes. He knew that Jane was not only someone who dedicated herself fully, but someone who deeply understood the value of preservation, and she would never accept defeat. "We will not let them destroy everything," Daniel said firmly. "We will do whatever it takes to keep your company, to protect your legacy." Jane stood and looked out the window. The world outside was dim and cold. Yet inside her, the light of determination burned fiercely. She was no longer the woman who sat waiting in weakness. She was a fighter, standing for what she believed in, for everything she had built throughout her life. That night, Jane no longer sat in silence enduring. She had begun to act. She had formed a plan to confront Luke and Claire, gathered her evidence, and prepared herself for an uncompromising battle. And this time, she was not only protecting herself, she was protecting everything she had spent her life building. "We will fight to the very end," Jane whispered to herself, her eyes sharp and unyielding. "I will not let them erase my legacy, and I will never surrender." Jane sat in the chair by the window in her study, the light from the desk lamp reflecting across the old drawings, illuminating the details she had spent decades creating. Yet in this moment, despite the preserved structures behind her, the solid walls she had protected her entire life, her mind was far removed from them. Last night, she had prepared a plan, but tonight was the moment she had to act. She looked at the phone in her hand, her thoughts spinning with the strategies she had mapped out with Daniel. But this plan was not about revenge, not about destruction. It was about protection. She could not allow Luke and Claire, the people who had once meant everything to her, to destroy what she had spent her entire life building. Not just the structures, but the values she had defended, the respect for history, and even her own career. Time seemed to move slowly in the stillness of the night. Jane picked up a drawing, her fingers tracing each line as if trying to reclaim a fragment of peace from the work she had devoted her life to. But no, that peace had long since left her, and now only determination remained. The night before, she had received a call from Luke. His voice had sounded caring, just like before when he was still her son, the one she loved and raised. But within that voice, she sensed something artificial, something calculated. He said they would meet her the next day to discuss documents transferring control. Those words were no longer expressions of concern, but fragments of manipulation. She realized she could not delay any longer. Everything had to end today. Jane stood up, deciding not to wait. She stepped out of the study, walked down the dark hallway and into the living room. Her eyes moved across everything, the objects she had placed there over the years, memories of the past. Each item felt like a reminder of what she had lost, of everything she had fought to protect. She had sacrificed so much for this family, for this company, for these structures. And now, the very people she loved wanted to take it all away. No, Jane told herself, I will not let them win. She returned to her desk, where the important documents were neatly arranged, and now there was no trace of doubt left within her. She had prepared everything she needed. The legal documents would reveal the truth. The preservation contracts, the ownership agreements, everything was ready so she could stand firm, not just for the company, but for the values she had upheld. She called Daniel again, not to ask for help, but to reaffirm the plan. "Are you here yet?" she asked, her voice steady and resolute. "I'm here," Daniel replied, his tone calm but serious. "Are you ready?" "I'm ready," Jane answered, glancing at the clock on the wall. "Tomorrow will be the deciding day. We will face the truth. I will not let Luke and Claire erase everything I've built." Daniel said nothing more, only nodded on the other end of the line. Jane knew he understood and that he was ready to act. She had fought greater forces before, people who wanted to destroy historic structures for personal gain. But this time, the battle was hers alone, a fight to protect her own existence and everything she had devoted her life to. She sat back down, looking out the window where the city lights were fading into the night. The streets were empty, everything quiet, except for the constant turning of thoughts in her mind. She did not know exactly how the confrontation would unfold the next day, but she knew she was prepared. Everything had been arranged. Everything was in her control. As dawn began to break, Jane felt something shift within her. There was no more confusion, no more fear. In its place was strength, a determination that could not be extinguished. She knew she would have to face Luke and Claire's persuasion. They would try everything to make her sign the documents they had prepared. But she was no longer the weak woman they believed her to be. She would not let them impose their will. She would stand firm, and she would win. That day, when Luke and Claire stepped into her house, they did not see a frail, exhausted woman as they had expected. They saw someone strong, resolute, and impossible to break. Jane sat in the living room, her gaze no longer that of a victim. It was the gaze of a fighter, a protector of legacy and family, a mother who could not be defeated. Today will be the day I decide, Jane thought, as Luke and Claire walked in with their self-satisfied smiles. But she was ready for this moment, and she knew they would never see the change in her until it was far too late. That day, Jane felt as though everything in the house was revolving around her, forming a closed circle she could not escape. The sound of Luke and Claire's footsteps echoed across the wooden floor, yet in her mind, everything slowed down. Her eyes drifted toward the window, where the morning light filtered through the clouds, but her thoughts were lost somewhere in the past. She remembered the earlier days, when everything had been simple, when her family was still whole, without deception, without cracks that could never be repaired. But now, the truth could no longer be hidden. Betrayal had taken root in the very place she once considered the safest. She was no longer the weak woman they believed her to be. She had hardened herself, prepared every detail of this plan. No more sitting still, no more silent endurance. The days of quiet resignation were over. Today, Jane would be the one in control, not the one being controlled. When Luke and Claire entered the living room, Jane remained seated, her eyes fixed on the documents on the table. Everything had been prepared long ago. She had thought through every possibility, every question they might ask, every argument they would use to corner her. But today, they would not win. Luke sat down in the chair across from her, his eyes filled with confidence, as if everything was already in his grasp. Claire stood nearby, composed, but the sharpness in her gaze revealed the calculation beneath. Both of them tried to maintain calm expressions, yet Jane knew they had nowhere left to retreat. Everything had been exposed. "We just want everything to go smoothly, Mom," Luke said, trying to create a gentle atmosphere, but his voice could not hide the tension. "You've done so much for the family already, now it's time for you to rest and let us take over." Jane did not respond immediately. She simply looked straight at her son, revealing not a single trace of emotion. She could see the deception in his eyes. His caring words now felt like sharp blades, cutting into her mind each time he spoke. "We don't want to upset you, but this is what's best for all of us." Those words left a bitter taste in her chest, but she refused to let the pain take control. "What's best for all of us?" Jane gave a faint smile, her voice calm beyond belief. "Best for whom, Luke? For you and Claire?" A flicker of surprise crossed Luke's eyes. He had not expected this reaction, but he quickly masked it and leaned closer, as if trying to persuade someone frail. "Mom, I just want you to live comfortably. Don't let all this old work exhaust you anymore." She looked at him, her heart feeling as if it were being torn apart. How could he say these things to her? How could he trade their bond for personal gain? But there was no time for sorrow, no time to waste on regret. Jane knew that today had to be the day she took back control. She could not allow her son to continue leading her into the trap he had set. "I am not tired," Jane said, her voice firm and unwavering. "I don't need rest. I don't need to give up what I've built. And most of all, I don't need anyone to decide for me." Claire looked at her, lips pressed tight, though her eyes still carried a trace of arrogance. "You know we don't mean to make things difficult. It's just that what you're doing now is too overwhelming. Don't let all this weigh on you anymore." A surge of pressure rose within Jane, but she remained calm. Her eyes stayed on the documents before her, where the evidence of everything they had done was already laid out. She had not only prepared herself mentally, she had prepared legally. The records she had kept, the contracts she had signed with preservation organizations, were now her strongest weapons to protect her work and her company. "This is what I need from you," Jane said, her voice lowering, sharper than ever. "You think I would easily sign those papers, don't you? You think I would sign and give up everything I've built over all these years?" Luke and Claire exchanged a glance, unease flickering in their eyes. Jane gave them no time to respond. She reached into the drawer and pulled out a printed image captured from the footage Lily had shown her. It showed Luke and Claire discussing their plan to weaken her, to force her into signing the documents they had prepared. The image landed between them like an explosion. "This is the truth you tried to hide," Jane said, each word cutting like a blade. "You deliberately tried to weaken me, deliberately tried to take away my ability to decide because you wanted to own everything. But you were wrong. I will not sign anything. I will never give up." The expressions on Luke and Claire's faces changed instantly. Their confidence, their arrogance vanished, replaced by anxiety and uncertainty. They had never imagined Jane would respond like this. They had never believed that the mother they saw as weak could push them into a corner. But now, they understood they were wrong. Jane was not someone who would fall easily. And they would have to pay for what they had done. "We will keep fighting," Jane thought, her gaze steady, free of all doubt. "For the truth, for everything I have protected all these years." At this point, everything was clear. There was no more doubt, no more avoidance. Jane looked at Luke and Claire, feeling the tension in the living room wrapped tightly around them like a net with no escape. The photo she had taken from the drawer still lay on the table, the light illuminating the images from the footage, their voices echoing in her ears. Every word, every action in that video cut into her like a blade, stirring a pain beyond description. But now, she no longer felt weak. She was no longer the mother being manipulated. She was the one in control. Luke and Claire sat across from her, their once confident expressions now transformed. Luke no longer carried the certainty he had shown earlier. Instead, he looked at his mother with unease, as if searching for a way to hide something, for an explanation. But nothing could conceal the truth. Claire was no different, her earlier arrogance replaced by a worry she could not mask. "Mom, it's not what you think," Luke said, his voice no longer firm. "You're misunderstanding. I just want you to rest. You deserve to rest." His words came quickly, as if he were grasping for an escape, for a justification. Jane did not respond right away. She simply looked at him, her sharp gaze unwavering. She knew exactly what was happening, and more than that, she knew his words held no value anymore. Everything was already exposed. She was not someone they could manipulate. "Stop talking, Luke," Jane said, her voice firm and steady. "Stop, because you have nothing left to justify. I've seen everything. That footage cannot be changed. Did you really think I wouldn't notice?" Luke glanced at Claire, as if seeking support, but Claire lowered her head and said nothing. Despite her effort to remain composed, the confusion on her face was undeniable. At this moment, all their deception had collapsed. Their attempts only made the truth clearer. "Mom, we just wanted to protect you," Claire said, her voice weak and unconvincing. "You've been so tired. You've given your whole life. Now it's time for you to rest." "Stop," Jane replied coldly and decisively. "You want me to rest, yet you do everything to strip me of my power. You want me to stop fighting, to stop protecting what I've built. You are no longer the children I once loved. You have become people who want to destroy everything for your own ambition." Her words cut like blades, each one carrying weight, striking directly at Luke and Claire. The room fell into a suffocating silence. No one spoke, only the tension remained. Luke sat there, fear flickering in his eyes, while Claire stayed silent, unable to face the truth. "Mom, don't do this," Luke said weakly. "We can settle this peacefully, can't we? Don't make things worse." He could not accept how strong she had become, could not accept that everything was slipping from his control. "It's too late for peace, Luke," Jane replied coldly. "You've already lost everything. And today, I will protect what I've built. I will not let you erase this legacy, no matter what tricks you try." A chill ran down Luke and Claire's spines. They could no longer justify, no longer manipulate her. She was not the weak woman they had believed her to be. Jane Markham, with her sharp mind and unbreakable resolve, had taken back control. "I will not sign any documents," Jane said firmly, "and if you continue this, you will face the consequences." Both Luke and Claire fell silent. They understood that their mother was no longer someone they could influence. There were no more easy concessions, no more gentle words to cover the truth. Jane had made her decision, and nothing they said could change it. Yet in that silence, an unfamiliar feeling rose within Jane. She did not feel the joy of victory, did not feel satisfaction in exposing her son. Instead, she felt a heaviness, as if a burden had settled on her shoulders. She had protected what she cherished, but the cost was immense. The people she once loved and trusted had become betrayers. Even so, Jane did not let emotion take control. She had fought, and she would continue to fight. She would not allow her son's betrayal to shake her belief in herself. because she knew that no matter how difficult the path ahead, she would protect everything she had built. We will not end here, Jane thought, her eyes steady and strong. This is only the beginning. That day, the air inside Jane's house grew heavy and threatening. Everything was set for the final confrontation. She stood in the middle of the living room, looking down at her hands, the same hands that had once skillfully shaped historic structures and protected priceless legacies. But today, those hands would not only defend buildings, they would defend her dignity, her authority, and everything she had fought for over the years. Jane was no longer the fragile mother Luke and Claire had expected. She was no longer someone easily manipulated. She had made her decision, and nothing could change it. All that remained was to prepare herself to face their final attempts at persuasion. She was no longer someone they could underestimate, no longer someone who could be swayed by gentle words or advice disguised as concern. They had made a mistake, thinking they could easily take everything she had built. They had failed to understand that what she created was not just a conservation company, but a part of who she was. That was why she would never give it up. She sat down, folding the important documents she had prepared in advance. Papers that proved her authority over the conservation company, contracts protecting the structures, legal commitments she had signed with preservation organizations. Every sheet, every signature was part of her plan. No one could destroy them easily. No one could take her power without paying the price. Luke and Claire entered the living room, but this time they no longer carried the same arrogance. Their eyes held hesitation, even fear, as if they had begun to realize that everything was slipping out of their control. They had thought Jane would be weak, that a little persuasion would be enough for her to hand everything over. But she was ready for everything that was coming. Luke sat across from her, his eyes flickering over the documents on the table, his lips pressed tightly together. "Mom," he began, his voice softer than before, "you've done so much. It's time to rest. We just want to make things easier for you." He spoke as if trying to calm the situation, but his words no longer had any effect. She had heard them too many times, and now they meant nothing. She looked straight into his eyes, her gaze sharp and unwavering. "So you want to make things easier for me? Or do you just want me to sign those papers so you can do whatever you want with what I've spent my life protecting?" Luke froze for a moment, surprise flashing across his face, but he quickly tried to regain composure. "Mom, we only want what's best for you. You don't need to worry about work anymore. You've done everything already. You deserve to rest." Jane smiled faintly, but it was not a smile of agreement. It was clarity, an unshakable resolve. "I don't need rest. I have lived my entire life protecting what I believe in, and I will not give it up just because you think I am old and weak." She paused, letting her words settle into the room. "If you want me to rest, you can leave. But if you think I will easily give up what I've built, then you are wrong." Claire stepped forward from behind Luke, trying to soften her tone. "Mom, I don't want you to suffer, but what if you can no longer manage everything? You don't want to see those structures destroyed either, do you?" Jane refused to be deceived any longer. She stood up, placing her hand firmly on the table, her fingers tightening. "You are taking advantage of the weakness you think I have. But you cannot take what does not belong to you. I have protected these structures not just with my mind, but with my heart, and you have no right to destroy them." The tension in the room tightened. Luke looked at her, his confidence completely gone. "You can't do this. You can't keep going like this forever. We don't want you to keep worrying about all of this." "I will not sign any documents," Jane said clearly, without hesitation. "You were wrong to think I would step aside. What you are doing will have consequences." Luke and Claire fell silent, their eyes filled with uncertainty. No more excuses, no more arguments. Their words had lost all meaning in the face of Jane's determination. Jane looked at them, but there was no hatred in her gaze, only a quiet sigh. "I have protected these structures for years. I will not let you destroy them because of your ambition." As the silence stretched on, Jane knew it was time to end this. She had fought enough, and the truth could no longer be hidden. Everything had been exposed. There was no turning back. This time, she would not allow anyone, not even her own son, to change what she had protected. "You can leave," Jane said calmly, "but you will not get what you want." Luke and Claire walked out in silence, unable to argue, unable to say another word. And as they stepped out the door, Jane did not feel defeated. She felt steady, knowing she had protected what mattered most. She had won, not by bringing them down, but by preserving the values she had built her life on. When the door closed, Jane stood alone in the living room, feeling a strange sense of relief. There was no triumph, no joy of victory, only a deep, quiet peace, because she knew she had done the right thing. That day, as the first light of morning filtered through the windows, Jane felt a strange shift within her. It was as if a weight had been lifted, yet at the same time she realized that an entirely new path had opened before her. She rose from her chair, the papers on the table still scattered, but they were no longer her only concern. Everything in this house, from her drawings to the preservation projects she had devoted her life to, now felt like part of the past. But what lay ahead remained uncertain. The question lingered in her mind, not easily answered. She had not slept at all the night before. Even as Luke and Claire's footsteps had faded from the house, the worry about what would come next clung to her like a shadow. They were not the kind of people who would give up easily, and she knew another confrontation would come. Yet after what had happened, Jane no longer felt fear. What gave her strength now was the unwavering foundation of the values she had protected for so many years. She sat down, her hand gently brushing over the documents, the contracts safeguarding the heritage structures she had signed. She had predicted everything correctly. She had not only protected her company, but also herself, preserving her control. It was not just about power. It was about respect, about affirming that everything she had done in her lifetime could not be destroyed by the ambition of those closest to her. But today, Jane no longer felt anger or disappointment. After everything that had happened, there was no rage in her heart, only clarity and a stronger determination than ever before. She knew a legal battle lay ahead, but she was ready. She had not allowed anyone to take away what she had built, and most importantly, she had held on to herself. That was her true victory. When the doorbell rang, Jane was not surprised. She had expected someone to come, not Luke or Claire, but Daniel, her longtime companion, the one who had stood beside her in the fight to preserve heritage. He had helped her plan the next steps. They did not need to rush, but they needed to act at the right moment. Daniel stepped inside, his expression calm but carrying a trace of concern. He knew this confrontation was not simple. But he also knew that if anyone could face the most difficult situations, it was Jane. She was the one who had stood against powerful forces, against those who sought to destroy heritage for personal gain. "You did well," Daniel said as he entered, his eyes filled with respect. "Everything is unfolding exactly as you predicted, but now it's time to prepare for the next step." Jane looked at him, her eyes steady and resolute. "I'm not just protecting the company, I'm protecting the truth. What matters is that we cannot let them continue to deceive and manipulate. They don't just want me to step down, they want control over everything I've built." Daniel nodded, knowing she was right. This battle was not only about reclaiming power, it was about preserving what was true. She would not allow the greedy and the unethical to take what she had protected for so many years. "You've prepared everything," Daniel said, his voice serious. "But I think we need to move faster. They won't give up easily, and if we wait too long, we may lose our chance." Jane knew he was right. She could not allow any further delay. She stood up, gathering the important documents and preparing for the next meeting. This would be an uncompromising legal battle. Yet within her, there was no fear, only careful preparation and absolute clarity. That day, when she stood in court, all eyes turned toward her. Luke and Claire were there, but they no longer carried their former confidence. Their expressions were no longer arrogant, but filled with anxiety and confusion as they realized they could no longer control the situation. They had never expected Jane to be this strong, never imagined she would be so thoroughly prepared. When the judge called her name, Jane stood. Every gaze followed her, but she felt no weakness, no hesitation. She felt calm, confident in every step. She had fought for years to protect historic structures, and now she would fight for herself. "This is my right," Jane said to the judge, her voice firm and unwavering. I am not only protecting the company, I am protecting the values I have spent my entire life preserving. Luke and Claire had nothing to say. The evidence was undeniable. The documents Jane had prepared, the contracts and legal commitments, stood as solid proof of her integrity. Every word, every piece of evidence affirmed that she had been right all along. In the end, when the judge delivered the decision, everything was clear. Jane not only retained control of the company, she also safeguarded the historic structures she had dedicated her life to protecting. It was a victory of perseverance, of justice, and of a woman who refused to accept defeat. When it was over, Jane walked out of the courtroom, her eyes bright, not because of victory, but because she had protected what mattered most, her respect for herself and for everything she had devoted her life to. Everything was over. Jane's study remained unchanged, just as it had always been. The drawings, the historic structures she had devoted her life to protecting, still lay on the table, yet her mind was no longer consumed by the struggle. She had won. But this victory was not about triumph or joy. It was a quiet sense of peace, a deep exhale, like an ancient structure preserved from the erosion of time. She knew life would never return to what it once was, but at least she had held on to the values she cherished. That day, as she stepped out of the courthouse, warm sunlight touched her face, highlighting the fine lines on her forehead. Those lines were not marks of age, but traces of years of hardship, of battles she had endured. She felt strength in every step, the strength of a woman who had refused to lose. Jane did not feel weak. She knew she had never been someone easily defeated, and today she had proven that, not only to her family, but to herself. As she walked away, she did not look back, even though Luke and Claire were still standing there, stunned and speechless. They had failed. She could sense the confusion in their eyes, but it no longer mattered to her. They could do nothing to change the truth. She had protected everything she had built, and they would never be able to erase what she had created. Jane got into her car and let out a slow breath. She did not feel excitement, nor any overwhelming sense of victory. What she felt was calm, a quiet relief, as if a heavy burden had finally been lifted. She no longer had to fight, at least not against her own family. She had gained the respect she deserved. She drove home, the familiar street as quiet as ever. Every house, every road stirred memories of the past, of the years she had devoted herself to heritage conservation. The structures she had saved, the long nights she had stayed awake to complete her work, all resurfaced in her mind. But now, everything had changed. She had protected what she loved, and more importantly, she had protected herself. When she arrived home, the house was silent, empty. Jane stepped into the living room and looked around, taking in the stillness. Everything remained the same, yet her state of mind had shifted. She no longer felt the loneliness that once lingered, but instead a sense of peace, a quiet harmony within herself. She no longer needed to prove anything. She no longer needed to fight. She had done enough. That night, Jane sat in her study, where the drawings and documents still waited as part of her daily life. But now, she felt no tension, no pressure. She knew she could continue her work in heritage conservation without fear or distraction. She had protected her company, preserved the structures, and safeguarded the values she had always upheld. She no longer had to face schemes, no longer had to resist betrayal. Jane had learned that in life, not every battle required fighting. Sometimes victory did not come from defeating others, but from holding on to one's belief in oneself, in everything one had built and protected. When she looked into the mirror in her study, she saw herself, not a frail mother, not a victim. She saw a strong, resilient woman, unbroken by time or betrayal. Jane knew she would continue to live a meaningful life, protecting the values she had created and passing them on to future generations. That was her true victory. The next morning, as sunlight filled the house, Jane stood by the window, looking outside. She felt a peace she had never known before. She no longer had to face those who wished to destroy her. The days of struggle had passed, and now she could finally breathe freely. But more importantly, she had found herself again. The respect she had lost had been restored, not only from others, but from within. She had won, and her life would continue. Nothing could stand in her way. Life never ends until we choose to give up, Jane thought to herself, and I will never give up. The life of Jane Markham is a testament to the power of perseverance and an unyielding spirit. Even when faced with betrayal and challenges that seemed impossible to overcome, she stood firm, protecting the values she cherished and fighting for justice. This is not only the story of a strong woman, but also a reminder that no matter how great the difficulties may be, we can overcome them if we refuse to give up. If Jane's story has inspired you, don't forget to share your thoughts and spread this message to others. Be sure to like and subscribe so you don't miss more meaningful stories to come. You can also leave a comment to share your feelings, reflections, or even your own story. Keep moving forward on your journey to discover your inner strength and resilience, because life always offers new opportunities if you choose not to give up.